Tuned into Recovery TV, the voice of hope, with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Discussions and information on addiction and mental health issues. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome to another edition of Recovery TV. Before I introduce my guest, I want to tell you about Narcan. Please get some. Keep it in your car, keep it in your purse, keep it in your luggage, keep it wherever you need to keep it. If you keep it in your car, take it in at night because it's susceptible to weather conditions, but it saves lives. Too many young people, middle-aged people, and older adults are dying every day of an overdose. So today my guests is Chris Farina and Jennifer View of FACT, F-A-C-T, and Chris is going to explain that. So welcome, Chris.
Thank
Jennifer,
you.
thank you so much
Thanks for being
joining
here.
us. So tell us about FACT.
Well, FACT is it started out as just a simply sort of educational presentation for kids. It stemmed out of the tragic death of my brother. He passed away from an overdose.
How old was your brother?
He was 37. He negotiated a good sentence. He had been in and out of jail and rehab facilities. The latest time he had negotiated a Salvation Army program in Holyoke in lieu of incarceration. He was sentenced to that program. My mother had dropped him off at the program. I believe 5 minutes later he left. So he got a hotel room. And he passed away. They informed my mother of the passing. I believe he was with someone else. She left. They discovered him 2 days later. Unfortunately, he didn't have his ID on him, so I took it upon myself to identify him. He had a record, so his prints were in the system. So they were able to inform my parents through that record check. And
So is this what happened to your brother? The light switch went on. You decided to do something about it. And that was what?
the program. The light switch had been on, but I guess I've been working in the field of criminal justice and mental health my whole life. But and you struggle with it because he was always in jail, in trouble, causing havoc with our family due to the addiction and everything that comes with it. To tell you the truth, I honestly felt I didn't have a choice. It just seemed right that I had to do something. Like the path was chosen for me. I just went with it, and I had to focus on. I wanted to really focus on something different. So when I was mourning his death, I just asked myself, where did it go wrong? And we were about 1.5 years difference. So that's 2 grades in school. So we're really close in age, and we were really close as kids, and even up through high school. We played on the same lacrosse team. So something different had to happen. And I really feel that it was his choices and thinking and behavior at a very young age that kind of paved the way. I mean, he didn't wake up at 37 and say, I'm going to try heroin.
Yeah.
It was a slow, progressive, almost textbook. Alcohol, marijuana in middle school, in his first rehab as a sophomore for alcoholism. By the time he was a senior, it was cocaine, then crack, pills, heroin, and so that was the progression. And I really felt strongly that that kids need to hear his story and where he went wrong. And I couldn't find any, when I was researching the different modalities, really didn't see much like a proactive program. DARE didn't work, Scared Straight didn't work. So for the Department of Corrections, we have a SCORE program. So I went in and I listened to them, and it was close, but it's still a little too scared straight. You know, the kids weren't hearing the message because they were yelling at them. So I listened to another individual, Louis Estrada, which is a good friend of the program and a good friend of mine and a pivotal speaker for a fact. I heard him speak, and I said, that's it. That's the message. He really focused on where he went wrong, what mistakes that he didn't rectify, and where it led him. Sometimes it leads to mental health, substance abuse. It's not all about substance abuse. Criminal behavior, suicide, all those types of all those types of variables that kids struggle with, we try to hit with our speakers and our message. Not one presentation is alike. They all bring unique, relatable stories to the audiences and the children. So I kind of threw it together, passed it through my department, saying, do you mind me doing this? Because I would love to use, they were like, absolutely, it's good for the department, because we're trying to put ourselves out of business, you know, that's the goal. So it's not just substance abuse that we focus on, it's sort of a symptom of the problem and not necessarily the problem.
You know, Chris, I say that quite a few times about this program. I hope someday they just knock on the door and say,
we don't need you anymore.
We don't need you anymore. That'll be the happiest day of my life. But it doesn't seem to be going that way.
No.
Now, you tripped over a rug and you found Jennifer. What happened there?
Jennifer pursued me through her probation officer. Her probation officer, rest in peace, she passed away. Complications due to alcoholism, unfortunately. Jennifer and Sandra, Jennifer was speaking at the NA meetings. Sandra knew Jennifer's, what she was all about. I didn't know Jennifer yet. And Sandra, seeing my program and being involved to the extent she visited a few of my talks, gave her my number and was forcing me to talk to Jen to talk to me. So we finally got together, and boom, that was it. I think it was 3 years into FACT, approximately.
I think so. It's been about 8 years, I think, I've been speaking.
And then she's a rock star. She's an absolute rock star. She just it takes a lot out of her, but she's an inspiration to the young women. She touches on a lot of very sensitive subjects, sexual assault, substance abuse, adults that don't listen when kids are telling them the truth. And I think that is the most important part of when Jen speaks is, if they don't listen to you, tell someone else. If they don't listen to you, tell someone else. If they don't listen to you, you tell someone until you get the person that you need. And the last one we did, a young lady took her aside and reported that she's going through some struggles that she related to. And if not for that, you know, maybe, and at that point we kick in, we talk to the school, and we have a victim advocate there that gives them resources for where they could get help. And at some point, I would like our program to develop those internal sort of either referrals to counseling or our own sort of infrastructure that we can deal at, as opposed to referring people out.
We're going to take a break, Jen, and you're going to be on the hot seat.
Okay.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. FACT is in the house. FACT is in the house. And you heard Chris talk about why, when, where, how, and now we're going to hear from Jennifer. So Jen, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, John, for having us.
So tell me about your position in FACT and what you do going out, because I heard you're the greatest thing since Sunbeam bread.
So I'm a speaker at FACT. I am a woman in long-term recovery. You know, and I do have there's some mental health behind that. You know,
How many years?
13 and a half, March 3rd, 2011. I walked out of
Great.
prison. I walked into my second rehabilitation center ever. Rehab was not part of it. Most of my detoxes happened in prison. And, you know, in and out over the years, the 38 years that I was, you know, actively using.
38?
38 years. 38 years I used.
Oh, you look that old, Jennifer.
God bless you, John. God bless you. I'm not going to say my age.
Yeah, no.
But
I didn't ask
I'll tell
you
you
that.
after. So yeah, I had a probation officer, and I owe a lot to Sandra. And again, you know, God rest her soul. She saw something in me that I didn't, and I was that kid who used my voice as a child. There was some trauma growing up, and I told some adults, and they declined what I was saying. And I think that's the beginning of the distortion of the disease of addiction. And I think that's where I can relate a lot to the kids in these schools, and they can relate to me. Because that's where it started. It was the behavioral. Like they weren't believing me. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I felt uncared for. And I kind of found a path of my own, and wanting to feel something different other than I felt, different from other kids and even siblings. I, experimented with that first drug, and that disease took over right away. I didn't know that. I didn't see my behaviors. The judges did, the lawyers did, the probation officers, parole officers did. But Sandra always saw something in me. I was with her long term. You become friends with these people when you go to see them every day.
Right.
I did, and I fought against it, and I fought against the state and everything. It's not my fault, and the criminal activity that Chris talked about absolutely is part of the addiction piece. And these kids too, whether it's drinking and driving, whether it's texting and driving, it's against the law. So I was their age at one point too, doing the same things, and I had some consequences behind that. And Sandra, again, always saw something in me, and she kept, hey, I have this guy, Chris, and he does this FACT program, and Sandra would come to my anniversaries in the program, and she said, you really got to meet with him. You're a good speaker. You have a message. And I did. I pursued Chris until he had to pick up the phone, and it was a match made in heaven when we met, and it was just, I relate to the kids because they're them, I'm them, and they're me. I was that age, you know what I mean? I was that age at one point, and it's, as a speaker, when you're speaking of whether it's sexual abuse, I'm a sexual abuse survivor, whether you're speaking of sexual abuse or mental health, the thoughts of suicide, prostitution that goes with the addiction, and all of those things, you can see the kids start to, because they are identifying, and that's our target area. That's really our target area. And many of these kids, and my story is not only for the women, but there's some young men that will come up and say, hey, me too, what can I do? What can I do for this? So I have some information. We all have a little bit of information on where to go. Counselors are very aware of it. Schools are working very closely with us. If the student is upset, they write to the counselor's office where they're able to disclose what it is they're feeling, whatever that uncomfortability is that they're feeling, and then help is received. I've had a lot of kids we've done in 8th grade, and I've seen them in the 9th grade, and they said, hey, I'm getting straight A's, thank you. A year later.
I'm going to just back up a little bit, because this has been one of my pet peeves in the state. We don't do enough for kids.
Yeah.
And if we did enough for kids, we wouldn't be in the predicament we're in today. All right? And I say this all the time with the state. If you can get Johnny, who's in the 6th grade, to straighten out, Johnny will not be in the line of training school and the ACI.
100%.
I was a business agent. The training school was mine. I represented all the JPWs in there. And I used to go in all the time and talk to the kids. Say, Chris, if you don't straighten out here, if you don't follow the rules here, if you don't do good in school, your next step is at the Cranston Hilton. That's what I used to tell them.
Correct.
And there's so many kids that maybe after 30, 60, 90 days would come up to me, because I was there mostly 2 or 3 times a week for issues. They would come up to me and said, you know what, thank you for what you did. I'll just tell you a quick story. I was sitting with my wife the other day at a restaurant. Some guy picked up the tab. And I went outside and he said to me, I just wanted to let you know, I want to thank you for what you're doing. I'm in recovery for 21 years.
Nice.
And that got me right here. Got me right here. And I put it on Facebook, and I have close to 600 people commenting on that. Never expected it. A wife and 2 kids sitting there. I mean, who goes and does that? I was
Right.
like dumbfounded. He said, I just want to let you know I picked up your tab. I said, why? Why'd you do that? He said, I know who you are. And I know what you do.
I think it's it's important that
This
we
show,
be heard.
this show is making a difference, and I don't even realize that it's making a difference. So what you do, talking to kids and trying to get kids on the straight and narrow, will ultimately pay benefits for the state. And they don't even realize it.
Right.
They don't realize it. I realize it because I see it. I see it.
John, you know what? On that point, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. She'll get me later. But on that point, that was my thinking. What you said was my thinking of knowing, working in the system for as long as I did, up to the point that there's nothing other than good intended DARE, which well, that's a whole nother story, and other types of programs that
Right.
speaks with kids. But the message is, we're listening to you, that some of the things you're going through, we're aware of, that you don't know, it could be one talk from her that that allows that person not to go down that path, because the path starts with a few poor choices, and you start going down this road, other people start to gravitate to you with the same mindset. So, you know, and
I got to take a break, Chris. I'm sorry. But then, I got to give Jennifer another shot.
that's true.
You're watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. We'll be right back after these messages.
Now, back to Recovery TV with your host, John J. Tassoni Jr. Recovery TV is made possible by our supporting sponsors and our title sponsor, AdCare. Now, here's John and today's guest.
Welcome back to Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Fact is in the house. FACT. Chris and Jennifer, thank you both for what you do.
Thank you.
This has been a pet peeve of mine for many, many years when I was in the General Assembly, too, because we have nothing for kids. We need to get kids on the straight and narrow. They need to talk to people. They need to air out their concerns, and they need to move forward, because if not, again, I'll say it, they'll end up at the Cranston Hilton, and then we got a lot of work for this gentleman right here. We don't want a lot of work from him. So, Jen, why don't you talk a little bit about what's next?
So I think, my objective, all of our objectives when we talk with the kids, is to rob them from the excuse that they didn't know what would happen if they made the choices that we made. And again, the panel that we have has a variety of criminal actions, and why, some of us were incarcerated, where some, where the roads that we had gone down. And it all stems from our childhood. And a lot of it, it's all behavioral, it's all thought process and behavioral. And I stated earlier that I think that if I was heard as a child, things could have been different for me. Because this is when I'm an advocate for children. I work with a lot of women in the program, and it's the children that I'm trying to save them from going down that same path as that parent recovers.
Right. I got to cut you short, I apologize. You've been watching Recovery TV, and I'm your host, John Tassoni. Rico Warren is my guest next week. He's with the Recovery Houses. If you see something, say something. Have a great week.